From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is Please Explain. I'm Samantha Selinger-Morris. It's Thursday, October 12. It's a practice that some people say has ruined their lives. For others, it's led to long-lasting mental and physical anguish. So why is gay conversion therapy banned in some states of Australia and perfectly legal in others? New South Wales Premier Chris Minns made an election promise that he would ban gay conversion practices if he were to be elected. That was in February this year. Since then, LGBTQ advocates have faced off against some religious groups which have vehemently opposed the ban, and others who fear a ban may lead to unintended consequences. Today, senior writer Caitlin Fitzsimmons on how hard it's been for many Australians to avoid persecution because of their sexual or gender identity. And just a warning, this episode mentions suicide and self-harm. So Caitlin, can you take us through what happened last week? All of a sudden, the New South Wales government announced that it will introduce legislation to ban gay conversion by the end of this year. And this wasn't originally the government's plan, so what has spurred them on to announce it just recently?
Well, the government had never actually said when they would introduce the legislation. It was an election promise.
New South Wales Labor is proudly announcing its election pledge to ban conversion therapy relating to a person's sexuality.
And one that they reaffirmed in August. They had not put a date on that. And then what happened last week is that the Australian Christian Lobby claimed credit for delaying the legislation. They said that staff and volunteers had made 8,000 calls to Labor politicians lobbying against the legislation, and that they claimed credit for the government deciding to put it back until next year. Multiple government sources did also confirm it was unlikely to be introduced to Parliament until next year. But of course, after the Christian Lobby came out and said that, there was a backlash, including from a lot of LGBTQ groups who were concerned that it had been put on the back burner.
Conversion practices cause real harm to people, and states across Australia have already taken steps to ban them. We can do that in New South Wales, and we should, particularly on the eve of World Pride.
And that seems to have prompted the government to come out and say, no, actually, might not get voted on this year, but it is going to get introduced to Parliament this year.
Okay, so before we get into just how supercharged politically this issue has become, can you explain to us what is gay conversion therapy and how prevalent is it here?
Yes, it's really important to be clear on what we mean by that. So it does include more than trying to convert a gay person. It includes both sexual orientation and gender identity. So sexual orientation refers to your romantic or sexual attraction to another person, whether that's to the same gender, the opposite gender, or both, or nothing. And gender identity refers to your personal sense of whether you're a man or a woman or non-binary or something else. So they are different concepts, and they kind of bring up some different issues when you're talking about conversion therapy. But the conversion therapy can be anything from what the LGBTQ person experiences when they're seeking maybe medical assistance from a psychiatrist or a psychologist or some other health professional, through to practices in a church, which can range from celibacy coaching to exorcisms. And historic conversion therapies have included electric shock treatment and other things that, as far as I know, are not practiced today, but there is still definitely conversion therapy that does happen today. And in the religious setting, it's mainly around groups to encourage celibacy for same-sex attracted people. So in terms of how prevalent it is in Australia, there's been some research done that suggests that 4% of people who are LGBTQ under the age of 25 have experienced conversion therapy, and that would be for people who are same-sex attracted, also for people who are trans or gender diverse, for people who experience it in a religious setting, for people who experience it in a healthcare setting, or any other setting, such as a school or in a family. And so it is still happening today. It may not be the same as it was in the past, but the survivors speak to really kind of serious lasting harms in terms of their mental health from any kind of practice that is designed to convert or suppress their sexuality or their gender identity.
Okay, so you've taken us really through the various areas in which people can encounter forms of gay conversion therapy. And you've mentioned the possible harms as well. I know there's research that documents increased risk for suicide and mental health problems, loneliness, even physical injury. Can you walk us through what sort of messages people might be getting, whether it's in a healthcare setting or a family or a school or a religious setting? What are the messages that people do get when they undergo whatever form of gay conversion therapy it is that they're experiencing?
Well, the message they get is that who they are is wrong, that the sexual attraction they feel to another person is wrong, or that who they feel that they are as a person is wrong. And that can lead to a very dark place. So I spoke to a number of young men who came from Opus Dei families, which is a conservative Catholic group, and they are all in their 20s or 30s. And when they were teenagers, they were taken by their families to psychologists or psychiatrists who offered so-called therapy to try to suppress or change their same-sex attraction. And that really left them with a lot of long-term issues that they had to deal with. At least one of them attempted suicide at 18. And for all of them, it's created intimacy issues that delayed them starting to form relationships and be able to live as who they are in their adult lives. I've also spoken to people who know people who are involved in some of the celibacy groups, which are not only targeted to LGBTQ people, but primarily are within both the Anglican and Catholic churches today. Now, the churches would not accept that this is conversion therapy, but if you're arguing for lifelong celibacy for a same-sex attracted person, then I think that would be covered by the suppression aspect of this legislation. And at least one of those services does say that while our support is not intended to convert same-sex attracted people, this can happen. And it's put in that encouraging way as if that would be a good thing.
And you mentioned Opus Dei there, which is an obscure offshoot of the Catholic Church. And I know that one man you spoke to, Tim Pocock.
Hi, my name's Tim Pocock. I'm 37 years old. I am an Australian actor. People might know me from a TV series called Dance Academy. So when most guys are catching footballs, I'm lifting hot girls in leotards. Nice. I'm Ethan.
Yeah, I know.
At audition, failed. I also played alongside Hugh Jackman, Ryan Reynolds in X-Men Origins Wolverine.
Go, now!
Did I get him?
Yeah.
He went to a school affiliated with Opus Dei, and he also had an experience of going to a Catholic psychologist who tried to cure him of same-sex attraction using hypnotherapy. So what did Tim tell you about his experiences and what sort of harm they caused him?
So he was taken by his parents to a Catholic psychologist.
I was 26 when I was taken to this psychologist.
And he remembers arriving and seeing religious paraphernalia in the clinic.
My mum was actually suffering from cancer. She told me she was taking me to this psychologist to help deal with her illness. There was religious iconography in the office, and he just immediately identified to me that he was Catholic and that he was also part of Opus Dei.
And the psychologist used hypnotherapy to try to cure him of same-sex attraction.
And kept talking to me about how he can hypnotise anything out of someone, like addiction to cigarettes or, I don't know, homosexuality. I went to appease my mum and her ideas. When she did pass, a few months later, I just stopped going. Because in those sessions...
It obviously didn't work.
I just felt really disrespected and very let down in that moment. It was just really disappointing to think that everything about me was being reduced to this one thing, and that was the focus point. Also that you know, my mum's dying fear was that she would die with me being gay, and that needed to be corrected before she died. It's really taken me up until about this year to find complete comfort in who I am as a person and to not care that I'm gay or to be able to introduce myself to people that way.
And he said also that the years of repression caused problems with intimacy because you'd come to an act of love and it would leave him thinking of hell and Satan and eternal damnation.
You live in a constant state of panic and fear, which was my life from a young age, because I've known since I was about 8 years old that I was gay, and always in that time known that it was quote unquote wrong, the worst of wrongs. So first of all, you don't love yourself, you hate yourself, you want to be somebody else. That's how you grow up, that's your normal.
He also says that even as an adult, his sibling has tried to convince him to attend a conversion therapy camp. So the fact that it exists is further evidence that conversion therapy is still happening today.
We'll be right back. So what exactly is the New South Wales government's planned legislation? Because we know the proposed ban will create both a new civil offence and a crime.
To be clear, we don't know what the proposed legislation will be. We haven't seen the legislation. What we've seen is a consultation paper. It was leaked in August and reported in this masthead. Its proposed approach, which would be similar to Victorian legislation, and it would ban conversion practices in any setting, both healthcare and religious, and for any age group. So that goes further than both the ACT, where it's just for minors, and Queensland, where it's just in healthcare settings. As you say, it would create both a crime and a civil offence. So in Victoria, there is a serious harm test before it can be considered a crime. And in fact, since Victorian legislation has come into place, there have been no criminal charges laid, and actually very few civil offences investigated either. Where it might differ from the Victorian legislation is the Victorian legislation bans any practices that are for the purpose of conversion, and the wording in the proposal in New South Wales bans it if it's the primary purpose. Now, there is some concern from LGBT groups that could leave a loophole that, okay, the practice is okay if conversion is the secondary practice. How that is resolved, I think, is a matter for the final legislation.
So can you tell us about the parties who oppose the ban of gay conversion therapy and why they're in such opposition to it?
There are a number of religious organisations that oppose banning conversion therapy, or at least would like very large exemptions for religious practice. The problem with that, of course, is that if most of the conversion practices are happening in a religious setting, then if you exempted all of that, then it wouldn't be a very effective ban. So it's important to note that not all religious groups oppose this. The Uniting Church, which is more progressive than many of the other mainstream churches, they're in favour of a ban. All of the peak health organisations, including, for example, the College of Psychiatrists and including the peak psychology bodies, they are all behind banning it. But even the mainstream peak bodies do have some concerns about how the bill is framed. For example, the College of Psychiatrists, they want any ban on conversion therapy for gender identity to still leave open the fact that these people may still require mental health treatment. They may have other issues going on. They may be in a gender exploration phase and need to work through that in a systematic and holistic way before they can definitively say, okay, I'm trans and I also want medical treatment. I think that some LGBT groups are concerned about psychiatrists playing gatekeeper, and there has been some historic disagreement with the role of psychiatry, but I think most people would support there being the ability to have proper individualised health care.
Okay, and as a final question, I wanted to ask you why, when it comes to banning gay conversion therapy, is there so many differences between how the states approach it? The ACT laws only protect minors. Queensland laws only apply in a healthcare setting. Victoria's laws, as you've mentioned, are really strong. They cover personal relationships, healthcare, religious groups, schools, and workplaces. So why isn't this something that's managed federally?
Well, because Australia is a federation and a lot of powers fall to the states. So the only way that you would get it managed federally is if all the states came together and agreed to pass nationally consistent legislation state by state. But it's the case for a lot of these issues. So voluntary assisted dying has been state by state, abortion laws have been state by state. A lot of these contentious health/social issues managed state by state. I think it probably would be good in the longer term if there was harmonisation between the states, but I think the focus in the short term has to be on getting legislation that the voters of any particular state are happy with.
Caitlin, we're lucky you've been following this so closely, so thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
If this episode has raised any issues for you, call Lifeline on 131114 or Beyond Blue on 1300 22 4636. Today's episode of Please Explain was produced by Tammy Mills. Our executive producer is Ruby Schwartz. Please Explain is a production of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. If you enjoy the show and want more of our journalism, subscribe to our newspapers today. It's the best way to support what we do. Search The Age or smh.com.au/subscribe. I'm Samantha Selinger Morris. This is Please Explain. Thanks for listening.